How a flourish applies to letters is a slightly different matter. So let's take a lowercase g. And we can see how this space is similar to this space, and how that space is related to the dividing of the internal space. But we can also see that the lines concave and convex, so that it goes in, closes, and opens. So if we hatch that in, we get a sense of this funneling and tunneling system. Now, flourishing with a broad edge mark is a little bit difficult because you have to sometimes compensate for the weight of this. So if you look at the G without the flourish, what you see is, you see the G. When the flourish is there, you look at the flourish. So what I tend to do is I tend to, so this is the angle of the pen. I tend to change the angle to a flatter angle. So I've gone back into the flourish, I've picked it up, and so it's allowed me to make a narrower flourish where this relates to this based on scale. This relates to, the sides relate to each other based on equality. So this is approximately a third smaller than this one. But we also get that funneling and it's much lower, the funneling. So we see the volume it picks up is more about there rather than it being higher. So it doesn't really interact with the letter that much, and you get a much better balance because this shape is lighter. The reason why it works is because I went back into the G and came out of it, rather than putting the tool down and trying to move from the point at which I stopped the letter G. Now this shape can quite easily be added to the top of an H. So this is an appendage, so it is appended to the letter. We can actually start with the flourish instead of adding it to the letter. And what we see are two very different things. You can tell that this has been added, whereas you can see that this is one shape. Now notice, this is closed, but it has a tendency to give it that internal space, that internal elliptical space. And as you can see, that internal space for the imagined ellipse is nearly the same as that as above. The flourish also crosses itself at nearly 90 degrees. This works well for broad pen calligraphy, but it doesn't work as well for a pointed nib structure. So I tend to suggest a flatter flourish, because as it's longer, it sort of draws your eye across in that direction to the right, which is where the writing is going to be. So if we try to drop this in, what we will see is this should be half of that. So it's all about these relationships and how the fractions of one make up with the fractions of the other to give you a sort of whole. Now, we don't have to do this interlacing flourish. We can move on and do a very simple curl. And that curl can have, using the corner, not pressing on the corner, a series of curls. So we can see here, this is equal, and this curve is related to this curve and this curve. So we see them opening and closing and coming to a point, but it's also related to how far out the bottom flourishes. We have a curve here, we have a curve here, we have a curve here, and we have a curve here. So not only do these curves relate to each other, these curves also relate to each other. And that's how flourishing works. It's all about balance. The other thing that you've probably noticed is that I'm not rushing the flourish. It's all rhythmic. It's all paced. So I'm going to do a slightly longer flourish. And what you would have noticed from this is it's much slower than you think it actually is. So if we plot a series of lines in, we can see how these lines relate to each other. And we can see how the internal space relates to each other. Now, remember, you're not a computer. So you won't get these points lining up one under the other, simply because it's the nature of how our hands work. If we plotted this on a computer, you'd get a fairly rigid structure, but this has a sort of vitality to it. Now, look at the weight of this shape at the top of this cube. It's quite heavy. And we have a flourish here. So this top part plus the first part of the flourish is heavy on the left side of the center of this interlacing flourish. And that's why we can have this much white space on the other side. But also look at how it opens up and out, just like we saw here. So it's all about balance. And if we look at how the lines here relate to the lines here, we can really see a sort of geometric balancing to the structure of the flourish.